What if the person you've been missing for 2 years was standing 30 feet away? And you didn't know it yet? Her name was Sergeant First Class Amara Osi Bonsu, and she was crouched behind a black curtain in the left wing of the Family Feud studio on the morning of November 18th, 2023, still wearing the jacket she had flown in. Not the dress her mother had packed for her, not the blouse her aunt had messaged about 3 times in the preceding week. The jacket, olive drab, worn at the left cuff, with a small ink stain on the inside collar from a pen that had leaked somewhere over the Atlantic. She had been awake for 31 hours. Her boots were still on. She had not eaten since a bag of pretzels over Frankfurt, and she did not notice because 30 feet away, on the other side of a curtain, her father was answering a question about things you find in a garage, and she could hear his voice, and nothing else on earth mattered. Her name was Sergeant First Class Amara Osi Bonsu. She was 29 years old. She was stationed at a logistics coordination base in Djibouti, on the Horn of Africa, and she had not stood in the same room as her father in 2 years, 4 months and 11 days. She knew the exact number. She had kept it, quietly, the way soldiers keep things. Not on paper, not in any place someone could find it, but in the body, the way your body keeps the things that matter most. Her father's name was Kofi Ose Bonsu. He was 61 years old, a retired mechanic from Silver Spring, Maryland, who had come to the United States from Ghana at 23 with $180, a suitcase, and an English vocabulary he had built almost entirely from American television, which was why, as he would tell anyone who asked, he had been watching Family Feud since before most of his American neighbors knew it existed. He was a large, warm, laughing man with a voice that arrived in a room slightly before he did, and hands that could fix anything, with an engine and a tendency to cry at graduations, weddings, sporting events, and, on one memorable occasion, a particularly moving commercial for paper towels. His wife, Abina, had learned early in their marriage not to hand him anything at a ceremony without also handing him something to wipe his eyes with. He was standing at the podium under the studio lights on the morning of November 18th, 2023, with Abena beside him and his son Emmanuel and Emmanuel's wife Janet and his youngest daughter Priscilla, who was 24, and had their mother's eyes and their father's laugh. And the 5 of them had driven up from Silver Spring the day before and stayed in a hotel that Abena had chosen for its proximity to the studio and its continental breakfast, which Kofi had eaten 2 full servings of that morning. Because, he said, he played to win. He did not know his oldest daughter was in the building. He did not know she had landed at LAX at 4:17 a.m. He did not know that Abena had been coordinating with the Family Feud production team for 11 weeks through a chain of communication so carefully compartmentalized that it had involved a separate email account, a code phrase agreed upon with producer Marcus Webb, and one very tense afternoon 3 weeks earlier, when Kofi had almost found a printed itinerary in the kitchen drawer, which Abner had explained as a travel deal she was considering for a future anniversary trip, a lie she had delivered with such conviction that she had surprised herself. He did not know any of it. He knew only that his daughter was deployed. He knew she was safe, she called. Every 2 weeks, Sundays, 8 o'clock Eastern, and the calls lasted as long as they could last before the connection degraded, and he always stayed on the line past the point of clear audio, talking into static, because he said it helped him feel like the distance was shorter than it was. He knew she was working hard. He knew she was proud of her service. He knew, because Amara had told him this directly in a call 6 months earlier that had cost her more composure than she had let on, that she did not know when she was coming home. What he did not know was that his daughter had submitted emergency leave paperwork on October 3rd, that her commanding officer, a woman named Major Dana Pickford, who had met Amara's father exactly once at a unit family day and remembered him as the man who had stood up and applauded every single soldier during the introduction ceremony, had approved it in 48 hours. That Amara had then called her mothers from the base at midnight Djibouti time and said, "Mama, I need you to tell me what Daddy's schedule looks like, and I need you to not tell him why." Abina had asked no further questions. She had written down 3 dates and said, "The Family Feud taping is November 18th. Can you make it?" Amara had said, "I'll make it." Getting there required 3 connections, 2 standby seats, a 4-hour delay in Dubai that she spent sitting on her duffel bag against a terminal wall, doing the arithmetic of whether the next flight would still get her to Los Angeles in time, and a final leg on which she sat in a middle seat between a sleeping businessman and a child who wanted to show her every level of a game on his tablet, which she engaged with fully and genuinely because she was 29 years old and had been awake since yesterday and needed something to do with her hands that wasn't counting hours. She landed at 4:17 a.m. A production driver named Sylvester met her at arrivals with a sign that just said OC and drove her to the studio without asking questions, which she appreciated more than she was able to say out loud. The plan was this: the game would proceed normally through the first 2 rounds. Between the second and third rounds, Steve Harvey would call a brief production pause. The curtain in the left wing would open. Amara would walk out. That was the plan. The thing about plans is that they are made before the moment arrives, and the moment, when it arrives, is never quite the shape of the plan. The game began. Kofi played with the focused, joyful intensity of a man who had genuinely prepared. He had, Priscilla confirmed later, spent 3 evenings that week quizzing himself on common survey answers, using a method he had developed independently and which involved a whiteboard in the garage and a system of categories that his family had indulged without comment. He was good. He was fast on the buzzer. He got a top answer in the first round on a question about things people do when they're nervous that made Steve Harvey stop and look at him with genuine admiration and say, "How fast did you come up with that?" Kofi grinned. "I was a mechanic for 30 years, he said. "I know how things run under pressure." The audience loved him immediately. Steve Harvey loved him immediately. The chemistry between them was the kind that happens once every several tapings. Two men with large personalities and genuine warmth, finding each other's rhythm in real time, and the result was loose and funny and full of the kind of laughter that comes from unexpected places. In the left wing, 30 feet away, Amara Osi Bonzu stood behind a curtain and listened to her father laugh and pressed the heel of her hand against her mouth and breathed through her nose. She had not heard that laugh in 2 years, 4 months and 11 days. A production assistant named Kezia stood beside her, not speaking, occasionally checking her earpiece for the cue. Amara did not need to be managed. She stood straight. Her boots were still on. Her hands were still. The jacket with the ink stain on the collar was buttoned to the second button. She was a soldier, and she knew how to wait, and she waited. Between rounds, Steve Harvey paused. He looked at the family at the podium. His expression shifted slightly, not dramatically, not telegraphing, just a small recalibration that only someone watching very closely would catch. He looked at Kofi. He looked at Abena, who had gone very still beside her husband. "Mr. O.C. Bonsu," he said, "I want to ask you something before we keep going." Kofi straightened. "Go ahead," he said, in the tone of a man who had no idea and no reason to expect anything other than a game show question. "Tell me about your family," Steve said. "Tell me who's missing today." The studio fell completely silent. Kofi looked at the podium for one moment. His jaw shifted. When he looked up, his eyes were already different. Not wet, not yet, but changed in the way eyes change when something private is being asked for in a public place. "My oldest daughter," he said. "Amara, she's deployed. She's in Africa. We haven't seen her in a long time." "How long?" Steve asked. 2 years, Kofi said. Then, more quietly, "and some months." Abena was looking at the floor. Priscilla was looking at the curtain in the left wing. Steve Harvey said, "I want you to know something. I want you to know that the people who love you, they find ways to close the distance." He paused. "Even when the distance is 9,000 miles, Kofi looked at him. The studio fell completely silent. Steve Harvey looked toward the left wing. He gave the smallest nod. The curtain opened. Amara Osi Bonsu walked out. She had been awake for 31 hours. She had 3 connections and a 4-hour delay and a middle seat in her body. She walked out from behind that curtain the way she did everything. Straight, steady, present. And she crossed 8 feet of studio floor before her father saw her, and when he saw her, the sound that came out of him was not a word. It was not a name. It was the sound a person makes when something they had stopped letting themselves want suddenly appears in front of them, in full reality, and the body has no prepared response, and so it just releases. Kofi Osi Bonsu stepped away from the podium. He crossed the stage in 4 steps. He was a large man, and he had large hands, and he had fixed engines for 30 years, and his arms closed around his daughter with the specific force of someone who has been holding back that particular embrace for 2 years, 4 months, and 11 days, and Amara, who was a soldier, and who had been straight-backed and steady since 4:17 a.m., put her face against her father's shoulder and stopped, being straight-backed and steady for the first time since she'd left. The studio fell completely silent. Then it wasn't silent anymore. A woman in the third row of the audience stood up. She didn't appear to decide to stand. Her body just rose, the way bodies do when something demands acknowledgement. And then the row around her rose, and then the row behind that. And within 11 seconds, every person in that studio was on their feet, and the sound they were making was not applause in the conventional sense, but something that had applause in it along with other things that don't have clean names. Steve Harvey stood at his mark and did not speak. He had hosted this show for years. He had seen proposals and reunions and moments of genuine human grace on this stage. He stood at his mark and watched Kofi Osei Bonsu hold his daughter, and he did not reach for a line or a joke or a professional transition. He just stood there. His mouth was closed. His eyes were bright, and he made no effort to do anything about that. One of the handheld camera operators, a woman named Deb, who had worked television production for 16 years, and once described her job as being invisible at the most important moments, stopped moving. She held her position and let the shot hold, and did not adjust and did not cut away, and later said in an interview that she had simply made the decision that this was not a shot. You interrupted. The boom operator on the left side of the stage, whose name was Terence, had his hand pressed flat against the side of his own face and was not pretending otherwise. Abner reached for Emmanuel's arm. She held it with both hands. Priscilla was crying with a kind of abandoned completeness that only younger siblings can manage, the tears running freely with no attempt at composure, and she was not embarrassed at all. Steve Harvey wasn't done. When the moment had breathed as long as it needed to breathe, he walked toward the family, not to his mark, not to the podium. He walked to where Kofi and Amara were standing, still close, Kofi's hand on his daughter's arm, as though checking that she was real. And Steve stood a few feet away and waited until Kofi looked at him. "She came 9,000 miles, Steve said. Kofi nodded. His voice was gone. He nodded again. "On standby," Amara said. Her voice was dry and steady, the soldier back in it now, but her eyes were still full. 2 of the legs were standby. Steve Harvey looked at her. "You got on standby flights across 2 continents to surprise your father." "Yes, sir." He shook his head slowly. Something in his face was open in a way it wasn't always open on camera. "I want to say something," he said, and then he paused for a long time before he said it, and when he said it his voice was lower and slower than usual. "We thank soldiers. We say it. We put it on bumper stickers, and we stand up at football games, and we mean it, or we think we mean it. But what we don't think about," he stopped again, "is what they're carrying while they're serving. The missing every day. The face of your father you can't see. The laugh you haven't heard in 2 years and some months." He looked at Amara. "That's the cost that doesn't get talked about. And you paid it complaint." Without asking anybody to notice, the studio fell completely silent. Steve Harvey walked to camera 1. He stood straight. He said, "I want to talk to everyone watching at home. If you have someone wearing a uniform right now, somewhere far from home, They are missing someone tonight. That is a certainty, and the distance they are carrying is not just miles. It is every ordinary moment they are not there for. Every Sunday dinner, every laugh around a table. The service is the visible thing. The missing is the invisible thing, and both of them are real. He paused. Hug a veteran. Not just on the holidays. On a Tuesday. On a random morning when nothing is happening. Because for them, the ordinary moments are the ones that cost the most. Nobody moved for a long time. The competing family, the Vasquez family from San Antonio, Texas, a multi-generational group who had come onto the show with enormous energy and a competitive streak that had made the first 2 rounds genuinely exciting, had been watching from their podium in total silence. Rosa Vasquez, the family matriarch, a 67-year-old retired school principal who had 2 nephews in the military and had not said a word since Amara walked out from behind the curtain, stepped away from her podium. She walked across the stage. She stood in front of Amara Osei Bonsu. "Thank you for your service," she said. It was a phrase that gets said a lot and can become a formality. But Rosa Vasquez said it the way you say something when you mean every syllable of it and you need the other person to know you're not being polite. "My nephews are one of them is deployed right now, and I don't. I think about what his mother feels." Her voice caught. She steadied it. "Thank you." Amara nodded. She put her hand out, and Rosa took it and held it for a moment. Then Rosa looked at Steve Harvey and said, "Whatever we need to do to make sure they win today, we're fine with that." The audience responded in a way that made the audio technician later note in the production record that the standard sound calibration was not sufficient for what had occurred. Steve Harvey looked at Rosa Vasquez for a long moment. Then he looked at the audience. Then he looked at the camera and smiled. Not the performance smile, but the real one, the one that came from somewhere behind the professional apparatus, and said, "That's a good woman right there." The game resumed. Amara took a position beside her father at the podium. The production team made a quiet adjustment to allow it, a thing that had apparently never been done in the show's format in this particular way, and Kofi played the next round with his daughter standing at his shoulder. And something about that arrangement, the large mechanic's hands and the soldier beside him, the olive-drab jacket and the Silver Spring Marion Man who had come to America at 23 with $180 and watched this show before his neighbors knew it, existed. Something about it was so complete and so right that the audience could feel it even before the round was over. The O.C. Bonsu family won by 11 points. The prize was $25,000. The studio erupted. But Steve Harvey wasn't done. After the celebration settled, after the hugging and the jumping, and Priscilla's full-bodied crying, and Emmanuel quietly wiping his face with the back of his hand, and Janet, his wife, taking a photograph of Kofi and Amara standing side by side that she would print and frame and send to every family member on 3 continents. After all of that, Steve Harvey walked back to the center of the stage and waited for quiet. He looked at Amara. "How long is your leave?" he asked. 18 days, she said. He nodded slowly. "Make them count." "Sir," she said, I already am. The clip went up on the Family Feud YouTube channel at 9:58 that evening. By 6 a.m., it had 5.3 million views. Within 4 days, it had reached 61 million, the most viewed clip in the show's social media history at the time of publication. It trended in 17 countries. Steve Harvey's camera speech was shared 14 million times independently. The United States Army shared the clip officially through its public affairs channels. 3 separate veterans organizations cited the segment in fundraising communications. A film critic who had not written about television in 6 years published a piece titled 4 Minutes that remembered what television is for. 3 months later, Amara Osei Bonsu completed her deployment and came home to Silver Spring, Maryland, on a Thursday morning in February. Kofi was in the driveway before the car stopped. He had been watching the street for 40 minutes. His wife had asked him to come inside. He had said, "In a minute," and then not moved. He opened the car door. He held her for a long time in the driveway on a Thursday in February in Silver Spring, Maryland, with the engine ticking as it cooled, and the neighbors' lights on in the early morning, and the sky, the particular gray that comes before the color returns to everything. A year after the taping, Kofi and Amara O.C. Bonsu established a fund through their local VFW chapter called the Closing the Distance Fund, dedicated to helping families of deployed service members afford travel to attend homecoming ceremonies when distance or cost would otherwise prevent it. In its first year, the fund raised $890,000, covered travel costs for 67 families, and received a matching contribution from a corporate donor who had watched the clip and asked only that the fund be named for something true. Amara named it herself. She said she chose those words because that was what the money did. It closed the distance, not the whole distance, but the last part, the part that mattered most. Today, Kofi Osei Bonsu keeps a photograph on the wall of his garage in Silver Spring. It is from the studio, taken by a production assistant with a phone in the minutes after the moment. Kofi, with both arms around his daughter, Amara in the olive jacket with the ink stain on the collar, both of them caught mid-law at something nobody remembers, surrounded by the studio lights and the family, and 30 feet of floor they had crossed to get to each other. He put it on the wall next to his tools. He sees it every time he works, every time someone asks about it. And people always ask about it. He tells the same part of the story first. Not the studio, not the clip, not the millions of views, or the fund, or the trending in 17 countries. He tells them about the standby flights. He tells them about Frankfurt and Dubai, and the middle seat, and the pretzels over the Atlantic. He tells them that his daughter flew 9,000 miles on standby to surprise him, and she didn't sleep, and she kept her boots on, and she walked out from behind a curtain, and the first thing he thought when he saw her face was not surprise and not joy, though both of those things came. The first thing he thought was, of course it's her. It was always going to be her. Love does not obey distance. It does not obey time zones or deployment schedules or standby seat availability or 4-hour delays in Dubai. It finds its way across 9,000 miles because it has no other option, because the alternative, the not trying, the staying behind the curtain, is not something love knows how to do. What you carry when someone is far away is not just the missing, it is the proof. The proof that the distance is real and the love is realer, and that one of those things always wins. Subscribe if this found you today, and share it with someone who has somebody far from home right now. They need to know the distance is being felt on both sides.